The wind rolled across the open plains as the sun touched the edge of the horizon, turning the sky into a deep copper glow. Out here, far from towns and crowds, everything felt slower, older, shaped by the land and the people who tried to survive on it. The ranch sat alone at the base of a low hill, its fences stretching wide, and the cattle moving like dark shadows in the fading light. Smoke rose from the small cabin chimney, thin and steady, carrying the smell of burning wood. It looked peaceful from a distance, but nothing about this night was calm for the young woman riding toward it. She held the reins tight. Her hands were trembling, though she kept telling herself to stay firm. She had no choice but to come here. She had tried to avoid this moment for weeks, hoping something would change, hoping she could solve her problem without involving the man who lived on this land. But hope had run out, and she had to face him now. Her horse was tired, but she urged it forward. The rancher needed to hear what she needed to say. Her life had already been difficult enough. She had come from a small settlement where gossip traveled faster than the river in flood season. People were quick to judge, slow to help, and always ready to point fingers at the one who seemed weakest. She had never felt welcome there. Not truly, but she stayed because she had nowhere else to go. And then her life changed in a way she did not expect, pulling her into trouble she could no longer hide. She knew the rancher by reputation. Hard-working, quiet, a man who preferred the company of land and horses more than people. Some said he had no kindness left in him after life broke him more than once. Others said he was fair, but firm, and that if he decided something, no one could change his mind. She remembered the last time she spoke to him. It was months ago when she had helped him carry supplies from the trading post to his wagon. He barely said more than a few words, but his voice had weight, and his eyes had the sharpness of a man who trusted little. She had not expected to ever cross paths with him again. But fate had different plans, and now she was riding straight toward him with a truth she feared would turn his life upside down as well as hers. The horse stopped near the corral. She slid off slowly, her legs shaking from the long ride. The rancher stepped out of the barn, wiping dust from his hands. He looked at her horse first, then at her, as if taking measure of the situation before saying anything. His expression was unreadable, the kind of face shaped by years of sun and hard work. He waited for her to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She tried again, forcing her breath to steady. This was the only chance she had, and she knew it. He moved closer, not with warmth, but with the calm strength of someone who had seen too many surprises in life to react quickly to anything. His boots thudded against the dry ground. When he stood in front of her, he folded his arms and waited. She swallowed and opened her mouth, knowing there was no gentle way to begin. When the words finally came out, her voice trembled but stayed steady enough to be understood. She said the words she had rehearsed 100 times. The words that had felt heavy every time she tried to say them. The words that changed everything the moment they left her mouth. Easy, I'm pregnant. The rancher froze for a moment, not because he was shocked, but because he understood the weight behind her voice. He looked at her closely, searching her face to see if she was hiding anything. She stood straight and did not look away. She wanted him to know she was speaking the truth. He took a slow breath and looked past her, toward the open land behind her horse, as if trying to piece together what must have happened before this moment. She stepped forward and tried to explain more, but he raised a hand, stopping her. He did not like long explanations. He was a man who acted before thinking too much. As she could already see the decision forming in his eyes, he did not ask who the father was. He did not ask how she ended up in this situation. He did not ask whether she was certain. The rancher only asked one thing. What do you want from me? His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, a hint of something she could not name. She told him she needed help. She could not stay in the settlement. People were turning cruel, and she feared what they would do. She had no family left. No place to stay. No one to trust? She remembered the stories about him, the ones that said he did not turn away someone in need if they were honest. She hoped those stories were true. He took another step forward. His shadow stretched across the dirt and touched her boots. She felt her heartbeat rise as he looked at her with a seriousness she had not expected. Without warning, he walked past her and grabbed her saddlebag. He opened it, checked its contents, and then threw it across the fence. She gasped and stepped forward, confused and worried. He did not explain himself. Instead, he grabbed her arm, firm but not painful, and guided her toward the cabin. She tried to ask what he was doing, but he spoke over her. You came here for help, fine, but help comes with rules. She felt her stomach twist. His tone was not angry, but it held a strength that made her uneasy. Inside the cabin, the air was warm, lit by a small lantern on the table. He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated and then obeyed. He stood near the door, his eyes locked on her, studying her the way a rancher studies a horse he is thinking of bringing into the herd. He asked her more questions, but not about the past. He wanted to know her plans, her intentions, and whether she understood the risks of staying on his land. She answered quietly, choosing each word with care. She wanted safety, a place to rest, and time to figure out what came next. She did not want to cause trouble. She did not want to take anything from him. She only wanted a chance to survive. The rancher listened without interruption. When she finished, he nodded once, as if making a decision he could not take back later. He walked to the back room and opened a wooden chest. She heard the clatter of metal and wood. When he returned, he held a rifle in one hand and handed her a folded blanket with the other. Her breath caught in her chest. She had not expected a weapon to appear at this moment. She looked up at him, waiting for an explanation. He said she would sleep in the small shed behind the cabin for tonight. He would bring her food later. But before that, he was going somewhere. She asked where, but he did not answer. He only said that if anyone came looking for her, she should not open the door. She felt fear rise inside her. She asked again where he was going. His answer came low and steady, carrying a warning she could not ignore. I'm going to speak to the people who made you run here. And when I return, things will not be the same. Before she could say anything else, he stepped outside, shut the door, and walked into the night with the rifle in hand. She ran to the window, watching him fade into the darkness. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, rattling the cabin walls. She whispered to herself, wondering if she had just done something foolish. Had she found safety, or had she stepped into deeper danger? She pressed her hand against her stomach and felt her fear mix with uncertainty. Whatever the rancher planned to do, she could no longer stop it, and somewhere out there, in the dark plains, he was already moving fast. Too fast for her to guess what he intended. But she knew one thing. When he returned, nothing about her life or his would stay the same. The lantern in the cabin flickered as she stood near the window, watching the last trace of the rancher disappear into the darkness. His steps had been steady, full of purpose, as if he already knew what needed to be done. But she had no idea what he planned or what kind of trouble he would stir by going after the people who pushed her away. The wind blew dust across the yard, and the animals in the corral shifted nervously, as if they sensed something unsettled in the night. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to steady her breathing. The cabin felt warm, but her thoughts kept pulling her into old memories she had tried to forget. She had never expected her life to turn into this, running from a settlement that had once felt like a place she could survive in. But the moment they discovered her secret, everything changed. Whispers turned into shouts, and once friendly faces shifted into cold stares. She had become a burden in their eyes, a problem they did not want. People believed she should have gone far away and never returned, as if she had done something unforgivable. Her mind drifted back to the day she realized she was in trouble. She remembered standing behind the small barn behind the settlement, holding her breath as she waited for her body to calm. She felt fear punch through her chest, but she told no one. She did not want pity, and she did not want more eyes watching her with judgment. For weeks, she tried hiding the truth. But in a community that lived so close together, nothing stayed hidden long. Rumors spread like fire in dry brush, and soon she found herself pushed to the edge of their world. Where she had no one left to trust, she had known she needed to leave. But she did not have a destination until one of the older women mentioned the rancher. She did not say it kindly. She said it in a bitter tone, like sending her to him was the same as throwing her into a storm. But the old woman also said he didn't allow mistreatment of anyone on his land, and that was enough for her to take a chance. Still, she knew nothing about him beyond the uneasy stories people told. They said he lived alone because life had taken too much from him. Some said he lost his family years ago, while others whispered about the fights he got into when someone crossed a line. But a few said he was the kind of man who did things without waiting for someone else's permission. That part frightened her now more than ever. She looked around the small cabin, noticing the simple things he owned. Tools arranged neatly on shelves. A sturdy table with worn edges. A pair of work gloves resting near the lantern. The place felt lived in, but not warm. Not empty either. More like someone kept it going out of routine rather than comfort. She wondered how long he had been alone here. How many nights he had sat in silence. How long it had been since anyone asked him for help. She jumped when she heard a distant noise outside. A faint echo from the hills. It might have been a coyote call or the crack of a branch under some wandering animal, but her nerves were too tight to ignore anything. She forced herself to breathe slower. He said she would be safe here. He had said it with certainty, and she wanted to trust that. But safety had become a rare feeling for her, and she was not sure if she knew what it felt like anymore. She stepped outside with the blanket he had given her, making her way toward the small shed behind the cabin. The ground felt cold under her boots, and the night air carried a sharp edge that made her pull the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The shed was small but sturdy. He had cleared a space for her, placing a few planks on the floor so she wouldn't sleep on bare dirt. He had even set an extra lantern inside. She appreciated the gesture, even though his rough manner made him hard to read. When she sat down on the blanket he had placed inside, she kept the lantern low, not wanting to waste the fuel. The shadows stretched across the walls as she tried to get comfortable. Sleep didn't come. Every sound in the darkness felt louder. Every rustle made her wonder whether someone from the settlement had followed her. The rancher seemed certain they would come looking, and that fear gnawed at her. She tried to tell herself he would return soon, but she wasn't sure how long he planned to be gone or what he intended to do once he reached the settlement. Her thoughts drifted toward him again. She replayed the moment he heard her say the truth. The way he froze, not with anger, but with something deeper. Something heavy. Even then, she felt he had made a decision before she finished speaking. He acted fast, without hesitation. And now he was out there in the dark, carrying a rifle, walking toward the people who had chased her away. She clenched her hands and tried to steady her thoughts. She didn't know him well enough to understand the choices he made. She didn't know whether his actions came from protection, anger, or some old wound he kept buried. The night grew colder as the moon climbed higher. She wrapped the blanket tighter, wishing the shed had a door she could lock. She felt herself drifting into half-sleep when the wind carried a sound that snapped her. Awake, hoofbeats, faint but getting closer. She held her breath. Her first thought was that the rancher had returned, but her body tensed when she realized something wasn't right. The rancher moved with a solid confidence, his steps steady and strong. These hoofbeats were uneven, slower, almost hesitant. She reached for the lantern, keeping it low as she stood and moved to the small gap near the wooden frame. In the distance, a figure on horseback appeared, moving through the open field toward the ranch. She squinted, trying to see clearly. The rider leaned forward, tired or injured. She felt her chest tighten with worry. Was it him? Or was it someone else? She could not tell in the half-light. She backed away from the window, unsure what to do. If it was the rancher, she should step out. If it wasn't, she should stay hidden. His warning echoed in her mind. If anyone comes, don't open the door. She stayed still as the horse slowed near the corral. The rider slipped down, nearly falling. She heard a weak grunt, followed by the sound of boots dragging across the dirt. She waited for a voice. A call, something, but the only sound was the horse pawing at the ground. The silence grew heavy, pressing against her ears. Before she could decide what to do, another sound reached her. Farther away, faster, more horses. More riders. She froze. Her breath caught. This wasn't him. This was something else. Someone else. Her heartbeat pounded as she realized the danger was closer than she thought. Whoever was out there had not come quietly, and they were not alone. She pressed herself against the wall of the shed, her hands trembling as she tried to listen. She didn't know if the first rider was friend or foe. She didn't know if the ones approaching were searching for her. But she knew one thing for certain. The rancher was not here, and whatever was coming toward the ranch was coming fast. She whispered a plea into the empty air, hoping the rancher would return soon. But deep down, she feared he was too far away to stop what was about to unfold, and as the hoofbeats grew louder, the night around her changed, carrying the sharp weight of something dangerous approaching the ranch, ready to shatter the fragile safety. She thought she had found. The hoofbeats grew louder until they pressed against her chest like a second heartbeat. She stayed still inside the shed, fingers clenched around the edge of the blanket as she tried to listen through the wooden boards. The first horse had already stopped near the corral. Now more riders were coming, faster than before, kicking up dust that she could almost taste in the air. The ranch, which had felt so quiet and distant from the world, was no longer alone. Trouble had found it. She moved to the narrow gap in the boards again and risked a look. Moonlight slid across the yard, silver and sharp. She saw the first rider now, slumped against the corral post. It was a young man, barely more than a boy, with a torn sleeve and a dark stain along his side. He tried to straighten himself and failed, gripping the fence to stay upright. His horse stood close by, sides heaving. She could not see his face clearly, but she could hear his breathing from where she stood, short, harsh, worn down, before she could wonder who he was. 3 more riders broke over the low rise and came into view. They were older, their outlines hard against the sky. Their horses were strong and restless. She could not see any badges on their coats from this distance, but there was something about the way they carried themselves that felt familiar. Settlement men. The type who believed their word mattered more than anyone else's, the kind who had pushed her out. They slowed near the boy and circled him like wolves. One of them dismounted and grabbed him by the collar. She could not hear every word, but bits of their voices reached her in sharp pieces carried by the wind. You rode ahead. You warned him, did you? The boy mumbled something she could not catch. The man holding him shoved him against the fence. She flinched at the sound of wood rattling. Another rider looked toward the cabin, toward the shed. She stepped back from the crack and held her breath, praying he had not seen her. She felt torn. The rancher had told her not to open the door for anyone. But the boy was hurt. Whoever he was outnumbered and already paying for some kind of choice he had made. Her instinct pushed her to move, to help him. Fear locked her in place. She pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling that old rush of anxiety return. It was not only her life she had to think about now. One of the men swung his leg over his saddle and stepped down, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy sound. He walked toward the cabin without hurry, like he already believed he controlled the situation. He pounded on the door with his fist, calling out the rancher's name. The sound shot through the yard, through the shed walls, right into her bones. She did not move. The rancher was still gone. No lantern light appeared inside the cabin. No voice answered. The man pounded a second time, louder. When no reply came, he walked around the side, testing the latch on the door. She heard the creak. Her heart climbed into her throat. If they realized the rancher was gone, they might start searching the rest of the property. And sooner or later, someone would find the shed at the corral. The boy tried to stand taller, maybe to draw their attention away from the buildings. One of the mounted men cursed at him. The boy spoke again, this time louder. He is not here. He rode out already? You are too late. Those words cut through the night. Her eyes widened. So this boy had seen the rancher leave and had tried to get here first to warn him. Or maybe to warn her. The man holding him slammed him back again, but the damage was done. Now the riders knew the rancher was gone, and anger rolled off them like heat from a fire. Inside the shed, she struggled to breathe quietly. The main conflict that had started in the settlement was now riding full force over this land. Her decision to come here, The rancher's decision to help her without asking for long stories. His choice to go back and confront the people she feared. Every move they had made in the last few hours had pulled them closer to this moment. Her mind slipped back to the settlement. To the first shift she noticed in the way people looked at her. It had started with small things. Conversations that went silent when she walked by. Women who moved their children away from her in the trading line. Men who stared too long, as if judging something about her they had no right to judge. Then came the questions. Who had done this? Why had she not gone to the preacher? Why had she not left quietly? It was as if her pregnancy offended the order they believed they had built for themselves. She had tried to keep her head down. She worked harder, took longer shifts where she could, tried to show she was still useful. But whispers grew. A few men started using her situation as a way to scare young girls into obedience. One in particular, a loud man with a sharp jaw, seemed almost eager for her to become a warning. She had seen him earlier in the day she escaped. He had stood near the well, laughing with others, pointing in her direction as if she were not even human. Now, as she listened, she heard his voice outside the shed. She would have known that rough tone anywhere. He was one of the men on horseback. One of the ones who had chased her from the settlement with words that felt as sharp as stones. He spoke about the rancher with no respect at all, as if the land and cattle were better than the man who owned them. He wanted control. Over her. Over anyone who refused to bow. She forced herself to move away from the wall and sit on the blanket again, though her body shook. She needed a plan. Running on foot in the dark was not an option. She did not know the land well enough, and if they saw movement, they would ride her down quickly. Staying put felt like waiting for a storm to break directly over her. Still, there was one thing she had learned in the settlement. If you could not fight, you had to watch. And if you watched closely enough, sometimes you found a way through trouble. Outside, the boy spoke again, his voice rough with pain. He told them they were making a mistake, that the rancher would not take kindly to them crossing his fence. The men laughed, but there was a hint of unease in that sound. Even they knew the rancher was not a man to forget an insult. She found herself wondering who the boy was to the rancher. A hand from another ranch, a drifting worker, or maybe someone from the settlement who had been tired of the way things were. Whatever his story, he had chosen the harder side tonight. Far from the ranch, the man they were all talking about was riding under a sky that had turned colder and darker than before. His horse moved at a steady pace, hooves beating a firm rhythm against the ground. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead. He knew the path to the settlement well. He had ridden it enough times to trade cattle, pick up supplies, or settle disputes about grazing lines. But tonight was different. Tonight he rode not for business, but for something far heavier. As the rancher rode, his thoughts circled back to the young woman who had appeared at his gate with those words, "Easy, I am pregnant." She had said it with a kind of tired courage, as if she knew it might cost her more than it saved. He had seen fear in others before, but hers held something else too. A deep shame that should not have been there. A quiet strength that the settlement had tried to crush. Her story stirred old memories he did not welcome. Years ago, there had been another woman on this land. Another time when life had grown inside a small cabin under a wide sky. Back then, he believed hard work and patience could hold everything together. Then disease swept through the valley one winter, mean and merciless. It took his wife and the child she carried before the snow melted. That loss had carved something out of him and left a hollow place. He covered with work and silence. So when this young woman stood in his yard, he had felt something he had not wanted to feel again. Responsibility. Not the kind forced by others, but the quiet pull that comes when another person looks at you with hope. He did not like long speeches. He did not like to think too far ahead. But he knew one thing clearly. No one would come onto his land and drag her away like a stray animal. As the rancher neared the low riverbed that marked the halfway point to the settlement, he saw tracks in the dust. Fresh hoof prints. Several horses. They had passed this way not long ago, heading in the opposite direction, toward his ranch. He stopped and stared at the ground. the truth settling in fast. They had gone after her instead of waiting for him. His hands curled into fists around the reins. He turned his horse sharply and kicked it into a faster pace, heading back the way he came. The conflict had shifted behind him in the time it took to ride out. They were already there, on his land, challenging him before he even reached them. The decision he had made to act fast now brought a new risk. He was not where he needed to be when trouble arrived. Back at the ranch, the men outside were growing restless. One suggested they set a small fire to draw the rancher out if he was hiding. Another wanted to drag the boy behind them back to the settlement as punishment. The man with the sharp jaw argued they should check every building first. The cabin, the barn, the shed. His words made her stomach knock dot. She listened to them argue, each choice sounding worse than the last. Fear coiled tight in her chest. But there was something else growing beside it, anger. They had taken her voice in the settlement. They had turned her into a warning, a story to frighten others. Now they had come here, trying to spread that control across land that did not belong to them. She felt the weight of the new life she carried and knew this moment would shape everything that came next. For her, for the rancher, for the boy who had already bled for a choice he made. For the men who believed they could decide the fate of anyone they wanted, outside. Boots crunched on dry ground as someone started walking toward the back of the cabin, toward the shed. Each step drew closer, slow and certain. Inside, she rose to her feet, every muscle tight, and looked toward the door. She had no weapon, no plan, only her wits and the thin trust she had placed in a rancher who was not yet there to protect her. The footsteps stopped just outside. A hand touched the wood, and before the latch moved, before she could decide whether to cry out or stay silent, another sound rolled over the land like distant thunder, breaking the night in a different direction and turning every head at the ranch toward the dark horizon. The sound that rolled across the plains made every man in the yard freeze. It wasn't thunder, though it carried the same deep weight. It was the sound of a single horse running hard, hooves striking the earth with force. The rhythm was fast, too fast for a stray animal, too steady for a frightened one. Whoever rode that horse was coming with purpose. The men outside turned toward the dark horizon. She stayed inside the shed, breath held tight in her chest. Barely daring to move, the rider's silhouette broke over the low hill. Even from a distance, the men recognized the shape and straightened. The rancher's horse cut through the shadows like a blade. The men exchanged quick looks, their confidence wavering. They hadn't expected him back so soon. They had counted on time. But the rancher had turned around the moment he saw their tracks. And now he was charging toward his own land with the kind of determination that made the ground feel smaller beneath him. She stepped closer to the small crack in the wall again, not sure if she should feel hope or fear. His return meant she wasn't alone anymore, but she could also feel the tension rising outside, sharp as wire pulled too tight. The men who came after her weren't stepping back. They weren't the type to admit they'd gone too far. Not even when danger stared them in the face. The rancher didn't slow as he approached. He rode straight toward the group, dust rising behind him. One of the men fumbled with the reins of his own horse, unsure whether to mount or stand his ground. Another called out, trying to sound brave, "We only came to talk," but the rancher didn't answer. Not yet. He stopped a few steps away from them, his horse breathing hard, steam rising from its body in the cold night. He looked at the boy slumped against the fence first, taking in the torn clothes and the way he struggled to stand. His jaw tightened. Then he turned his sharp stare on the men who surrounded him. She couldn't hear all the words he spoke, but she heard the tone, low, controlled, dangerous, a tone carved from years of losses and quiet fights. The rancher wasn't a man who yelled. He didn't need to. His silence held more weight than another man's shouting, one of the riders tried to explain. He said they were only trying to bring the girl back to the settlement. They said the preacher needed to speak with her. They said she had responsibility to the community. She felt her stomach twist. She had heard these excuses before. Words hiding threats. Promises hiding punishment. The rancher leaned forward slightly, still mounted on his horse. He didn't raise his voice when he responded, but every man in the yard heard him clearly. He told them they had no claim on her. No right to chase her across the plains. No right to step on his land without permission. The cold warning in his voice cut through the air like metal dragged across stone. The man with the sharp jaw stepped forward, trying to match the rancher's steadiness. He demanded she come out. He said the settlement had rules. He said they wouldn't leave without her. His voice echoed the same authority he had used before, that false confidence built from controlling others who had less power. Inside the shed, she felt something fierce rise in her chest. Fear, yes, but also a quiet anger she hadn't felt in weeks. She didn't want to go back. This land behind the rancher felt like the first place she could breathe. She didn't want the child she carried to be raised under the judgment that had nearly broken her. She wanted a future that didn't feel like a cage. The boy near the fence looked toward the rancher with desperate eyes. It was clear he had come ahead to warn him. He must have known what the settlement men planned. Maybe he had family there. Maybe he had left behind something important. But he had still chosen to ride here. That choice meant something, even if she didn't know what yet. The rancher dismounted at last. The earth shook slightly under the weight of his boots. He moved with the same calm strength he had shown earlier, but now his posture held a clear message. He wasn't letting anyone take the girl from his land. Not tonight. Not while he breathed, but the men weren't ready to back down. One of them stepped forward, hand near his belt, not quite drawing a weapon but close enough to show intent. Another mounted his horse as if preparing for a chase. The tension in the yard tightened like rope pulled to its limits, ready to snap at the slightest wrong move. She felt her heartbeat in her throat. She knew the rancher was strong, but he was only one man. And these men had come with numbers, anger, and a belief they were justified. Even if he scared them, the wrong spark could make everything explode into chaos. The rancher told the boy to get inside the cabin. His voice left no room for argument. The boy tried to walk but stumbled. The rancher moved toward him and lifted him with one arm, steadying him enough to reach the porch. The men didn't stop him, but their frustration grew, boiling beneath their skin. They didn't like losing control. They didn't like being told no. As the rancher helped the boy, the man with the sharp jaw stepped closer to the shed. She heard his boots crunch on the ground directly outside. Her breath froze as he reached for the shed door again, as if he wanted to force her out before the rancher finished helping the boy. His hand was on the latch. She backed away into the shadows of the shed, hands shaking, before he could open it. The rancher's voice cut through the yard. Not loud, not a shout, but strong enough to stop the man's hand. She couldn't hear every word he spoke, but she knew the meaning. The rancher was giving him one last warning. One last chance to step back. The man froze, torn between anger and fear. She saw his shoulders tense through the crack in the wall. He wanted to pull the latch, but he also knew what the rancher was capable of. The silence that followed felt deep enough to swallow every sound around them. Then another rider broke the moment by yelling from the other side of the corral. He pointed toward the riverbed in the distance. She followed his gesture. At first she saw nothing. Then she saw movement. A lantern flickered in the distance. Then another. More riders. More settlement men, reinforcements. Her chest tightened. The rancher saw them too. His face shifted, not with fear, but with calculation. He knew the odds had changed. Whatever small balance had existed before was gone. Now the conflict had shifted into something larger. Something that couldn't be talked away. The approaching riders were still far, but their lanterns glowed like floating fireflies over the dark land. They were spread out, moving in a wide formation. This was no simple argument anymore. This was a confrontation waiting to boil over. The rancher looked toward the shed briefly, as if he knew she was watching. She didn't know how, but something in the way he paused made her feel seen. Not exposed, but acknowledged. It calmed her, but only a little. The men near the corral straightened again, confidence returning with the backup approaching. The man at her door stepped forward as if ready to test the latch again. The rancher's hand moved toward his belt. Every eye in the yard focused on those two small movements. She stepped forward without thinking, drawn by instinct. She placed her hand on the wooden boards of the shed, ready to push them open even though the rancher had warned her not to. She didn't want him to stand alone. She couldn't watch this break into something worse. But the moment her fingers touched the wood, a sharp crack echoed through the air. Not a weapon. A whip. The rancher had snapped it against the ground so suddenly that even the horses jerked back. The sound tore through the standoff, stunning the man at the shed door. The rancher stepped forward, shoulders squared, and the message was clear. If anyone touched that shed again, he would act without hesitation, but the reinforcements kept coming, their lanterns cutting through the darkness. The yard filled with the growing tension of two sides ready to collide, the air heavy with unfinished stories and unresolved anger. The girl inside the shed could feel it. The rancher could feel it. Even the boy in the cabin felt it as he tried to sit upright despite his injury. She whispered a quiet plea into the silence, hoping the wind carried it far enough, and as more riders drew close, as the last slim space between peace and chaos vanished, the rancher stepped into the middle of the yard with a steady breath. Knowing that the hardest moment of the night was only beginning, the rancher stood in the center of the yard, the cold air brushing against his coat as the reinforcements drew closer. The lanterns made a moving line of light across the dark plain. The men already at the ranch shifted their weight, ready to lean on the power they believed was coming to back them. She could feel the pressure building, but she also sensed something changing in the rancher. He was standing taller, stronger, almost calmer than before, as if the rising danger steadied him instead of shaking him. Inside the shed, she pressed her hand to her stomach and tried to breathe through the fear. She had never asked for this conflict. She had only wanted a place to be safe, a quiet chance to survive. But the rancher had chosen to shield her. And now this land that once felt empty and forgotten had become a battlefield of choices. Pride and protection. When the reinforcement riders reached the edge of the yard, they slowed. Their horses snorted in the cold night, hooves shifting in the dust. The men looked confused. They had expected shouting, a fight already in progress. Instead, they found the rancher standing still, facing them with a calm that unsettled even the toughest among them. The leader of the new group dismounted and walked forward. He was older, his hair lighter with age, his expression worn from years of trying to keep order among stubborn people. He looked around slowly, taking in everything. The injured boy, the tense men, the shed, the rancher. What is going on here? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. The man with the sharp jaw stepped forward to speak first, trying to twist the story into a version that suited him. He said the girl had run away. He said the rancher was hiding her. He said the settlement had a right to bring her back. He spoke as if she were property, as if the rancher was the one causing trouble, but before he could continue, the older leader raised a hand for silence. He turned to the rancher with a steady look, asking him to give his side of the story. The rancher didn't hesitate. He spoke clearly, telling the truth with no attempt to soften it. She came to me because she feared them. She asked for shelter. That is all. The yard fell quiet. The truth was simple, but it hit harder than any long speech. The older leader studied the rancher's face, then the group of men who had come first. The tension in the circle shifted as guilt began to creep across some of their expressions. A few of the new riders looked irritated, not at the rancher, but at the behavior of their own people. The older leader asked where she was. The rancher didn't say exactly, but he didn't need to. He only said she was safe. The tone in his voice made it clear she wasn't being dragged out for display. The sharp-jawed man tried to argue again, raising his voice this time, claiming that she was a shame to the settlement, that her condition made people uneasy, that they couldn't allow her to choose her own path. But the older leader cut him off sharply. His words came firm, controlled, and edged with disappointment. Shame is not an excuse to harm someone. Not a girl. Not anyone? The man stepped back, swallowing whatever he wanted to say next. The boy near the cabin raised his head weakly, trying to speak. He said the men had chased her without reason, that he rode ahead to warn the rancher because he didn't want things to go too far. His voice cracked with the effort, but the truth carried through. Some of the reinforcements looked angry now, not at the rancher, but at the men who had brought them here. Under false pretenses, one rider from the newer group turned to the older leader and said he didn't want to be part of something that hurt someone innocent. Another nodded. Soon, whispers spread through the group. The sharp-jawed man looked smaller now. Trapped in the truth unraveling around him, the older leader took a long breath and addressed everyone. He said the settlement had forgotten itself. It had let fear guide decisions. It had allowed certain men to act like they owned the rules. Then he looked toward the rancher. If she wants to stay here, that is her choice. The rancher nodded once. No emotion. Just certainty. The older leader turned back to the first group and ordered them to mount up. He didn't raise his voice, but the warning beneath it was enough to make every one of them obey. They rode off slowly, heads lowered, knowing they had crossed a line too far. The reinforcements followed them, leaving the ranch quiet again. When their lanterns disappeared into the darkness, the rancher finally let out a slow breath. He turned toward the shed, and she felt her heart lift in her chest. She stepped out before he reached it, moving carefully through the cold night. The shed door creaked softly as she opened it. Her legs shook, but she stood tall enough to meet his eyes. He looked at her not with expectation, but with reassurance. She felt warmth fill her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Real safety. The kind built from action, not words. The boy inside the cabin needed help, so the rancher guided him into the house. She followed, wanting to help too. She tore strips from an old cloth and cleaned the boy's wound while the rancher boiled water. The boy watched her quietly, his eyes filled with gratitude. He whispered that he didn't want the settlement to become a place where people lost their humanity. She squeezed his hand gently, letting him know he had done the right thing by coming. When the boy finally rested, the rancher stepped outside to check the horses and the yard. She followed him, feeling the cool night air settle around them. The sky was clearer now, stars scattered across it like tiny sparks. She stood beside him, unsure how to express everything inside her. He looked at her slowly, studying her the same way he had when she first arrived, but now his expression held something softer. Something unspoken but strong. He told her she didn't have to leave. Not tonight. Not ever, unless she wanted to. He told her she had her own freedom here. Her own voice. Her own future. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She placed her hand over her stomach again, but this time, instead of fear, she felt hope. She asked him if he was sure. He nodded. This land has room for more than one life. His words settled deep inside her. She knew he wasn't just offering shelter. He was offering space to grow, a chance to build a new beginning, a place where she wouldn't be judged, where she could raise her child with dignity. In the following days, the ranch transformed. The boy recovered slowly and chose to stay on as a ranch hand. The settlement quieted down, ashamed of its behavior. A few kind families visited the ranch to apologize, bringing supplies and warm food. The older leader sent a message saying they would not trouble her again. The rancher repaired the shed and built her a room inside the cabin. He didn't say it, but she could tell he wanted her to feel like she belonged. And she did. For the first time in her life, she felt like she fit somewhere. As the weeks passed, she worked beside him, learned the rhythm of the ranch, and found strength she didn't know she had. The rancher grew gentler too, allowing himself to trust again. Their quiet partnership turned into something deeper. Something stable and warm like sunlight after a long winter. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the land shimmered in the soft light, she stood with him on the porch. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass. The boy worked nearby, humming softly. The ranch felt full now, alive with new beginnings. She looked at the man beside her, the one who had acted fast when others only pointed fingers, the one who had stood between her and every danger, the one who gave her a life again. She whispered her thanks, and he said she didn't owe him anything. But she knew better. They had saved each other in different ways. And as the last light faded behind the hills, she rested her hand in his, trusting the land, the future, and the quiet peace they had finally earned together.